So good evening. This is our second session of 5 Thoughts on Marriage and Relationships. Tonight we have Adam Horn with us. He has a private practice here in Nashville called Nashville Psychotherapy Institute, and he is a licensed marital and family therapist with over 27 years of experience. He has several areas of expertise, including relationships, depression, loss and grief, trauma, anxiety, we're so excited to have him here. He has a unique philosophy in that he believes that, or a positive philosophy, I should say. I don't know if it's unique, but that he believes everyone has strengths, and that occasionally we lose our way. And he builds upon people's strengths, whether it's individual or with couples, to help us recognize our strengths and then align our actions to our objectives and values. So hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about his thought process on that with couples tonight in our second session. So please welcome Adam Horn.
Thank you, Lauren. Cue the virtual applause. I appreciate the introduction. It's good to be here with everybody. One thing that I want to clarify from what Lauren shared, the name of my practice is Strength to Strength Counseling Services. I am a member of Nashville Psychotherapy Institute, though. So just to clarify that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I pulled up a page that said that at the top. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. I just thought I would clarify. It's great to be here. I'm really happy about this opportunity to present on my 5 particular thoughts of marriage and relationships. I thought I would do just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I'm not going to tell you where the restrooms are located. I hope you know that wherever you're at. But I do want to share that I decided to kind of go in and out of the PowerPoint, sometimes on, sometimes off, because since this isn't an in-person presentation, I think it'll help. I'm hoping it helps to keep things a little bit more engaged if when you're seeing me without the PowerPoint, it's a little more full screen, and then the PowerPoint tends to make my image small. So hopefully that works okay. I appreciate your patience as I kind of, if there's slight technical delays as I move in and out of that. And speaking of which, let me give that a try right now. Okay, hopefully everybody is seeing the PowerPoint. There we go, I got a thumbs up from Lauren, so that sounds good. Good, so the other thing I want to say, just to get out of the way before I start, is just I decided for simplicity and clarity, I'm usually in this presentation going to refer to a committed romantic partnership as marriage and the partners in that relationship as spouses. Even though I realize that some committed partners may not be married, if I'm referring to it that way, it's not that I don't realize that, it's just I'm trying to keep that simple. The other thing I wanted to say is, in terms of questions, I'll hold questions until the end, but feel free during the presentation, if you think of something you want to ask about or hear more about, or get my thoughts on, to send a chat message over to me privately or whatever. And then at the end of the time, depending on how much time there is, I'll plan to kind of take those in order and see how many we can get to. But that way you don't have to jot it down or try to remember. When it occurs to you, feel free to just send that over and that'll be fine. Okay, so with that, why don't we begin? Okay, so I thought the first thing might be good before I tell you my 5, before I start going through these 5 thoughts, just tell you what they're going to be. I trust that as I put these up here, you'll have your own ideas, and that's fine. We'll kind of pull that together. So the first thought that I wanted to share is the notion of together but separate. And then I will move into connection before communication. The third thought is owning your own emotions and triggers. And then complementary, not threatening. And finally, I saved the best for last, and I'll end with romance. Okay, so in getting started here, my first thought, together but separate. So I think it's worth asking the question, what is a good, healthy, or strong marriage, right? If we're talking about marriage and relationships, it's good to be thinking, what do we think a good or strong marriage really looks like? There are many different models out there for a healthy marriage. For the purposes of this Together But Separate, I'd like to share one with you that I particularly like. It comes up a lot in my practice with couples. But first, I want to provide just a little bit of context for this. So, as individuals and couples, we tend to develop or overdevelop what we know to do for coping in our lives and our relationships. That makes sense, right? If something works, we do more of it. However, if something is overdeveloped in us as a way of coping, it suggests that something also may be underdeveloped. For example, if we have strongly developed an approach of being louder and more forceful in order to be heard, if we feel that's necessary to be heard, we may have underdeveloped our skills with allowing for more quiet and space for things to unfold. So, overdeveloped, this guy's saying, they're not listening when I talk, I need to be heard. So I'm going to raise my voice. Now are they listening? Good, that's good, that worked. I'm going to keep raising my voice and do it more often. So overdeveloped. And then the underdeveloped voice says, perhaps it might help more at this point if I allow for silences. Listen more than talk. Perhaps a more gentle or tender approach might actually help me to be heard better now. So now here's that model for a healthy relationship I said I would share. So most couples are either highly developed at togetherness or at separateness, but more rarely at both. So let's start with taking a look at the together couple, the couple who has a really developed ability to be strong together. So they know how to share their lives with each other, right? They enjoy time with shared activities, interests, adventures, their work, their friends, their feelings, experiences. But as soon as one of them wants to develop one of these areas on their own and separately, it threatens the sense of emotional safety in the couple. So that's our together couple, okay? And then we have our separate couple, the one who have an overdeveloped ability to be strong as separate. They know how to stand on their own as individuals. They have their own work, their own activities, their own hobbies, friends, interests. They coordinate the business of the household as needed. They probably go out on the occasional date, and they meet up in the bedroom for occasional sex. But as soon as one of them wants to share vulnerable feelings and quality intimate time together, it threatens the sense of distance and emotional safety in the separate individual. But what if a couple recognizes what is underdeveloped for them as a couple and puts attention to that area? What if a couple adopts a view that they're strongest as a couple when they are strong together and separately at the same time? What if there's room for both? What if strong together doesn't need to threaten the individual differences and strong separate doesn't need to threaten the shared experience? I would say that this can help lead to a stronger foundation in the relationship, deeper connections, fulfillment, a greater sense of emotional security. So that's my together and separate thought. Thought number one, check. All right, now my second thought. Connection before communication. So in my practice, I would say at least half, if not more, of the couples that come in to work on their relationship identify communication specifically as one of the primary issues that's bringing them into therapy together. This can mean so many different things for different couples, but usually the gist that they provide when I ask for more information is that they often miss when it comes to talking about their relationship, their needs, and their experiences. They just don't understand each other. They tend to convey or try to convey one thing and something else seems to be heard. Or they've just stopped trying to share sensitive things with each other altogether, having learned that it just seems to lead to more conflict or disconnect or pain. They seem to have the idea that if they could just learn better communication skills, they'd be able to understand each other, leading to greater connection, togetherness, closeness, intimacy. Now, in fairness, there is some truth to this notion for sure. Improved communication can definitely help with connection. We work on communication in my practice in many ways. I'll give you a couple examples. I often work with couples on clarifying and owning what they're asking for from each other. And encourage them to practice asking without blame or criticism. That sounds easy, but many couples find it difficult to just simply ask for what they're looking for. I also assist couples with expanding their tools and resources when communicating to have a clearer distinction or boundary between the facts of what they're trying to say, the feelings they have about it, the meaning they make about the things that happen, and then the asks or the things that they're requesting of each other in their communication. Often these four things get blurred together. This tends to help with clarity and increases the chances that they'll be heard. So while I believe that improved communication can definitely help improve connection, it works the other way around too. And this often gets missed. In fact, I'd say that emphasizing this the other direction is often much more powerful and effective on a deeper level, if the ultimate goal is to strengthen closeness and intimacy in the marriage. Improved connection helps improve communication. So what do I mean by improved communication? Well, it's the together part of being together. I'm sorry, by improved connection, right? Also communication, but it's the together part of being together but separate. It's learning and relearning about each other. It's getting curious and interested in each other. Asking, what are you struggling with and what's challenging for you right now at home, at work, socially? What's going on in your life? You know, what are you afraid of or concerned about? What feels important to you? What's been on your mind? What are your hopes, wishes, dreams? Is there anything that I've done or said recently that's hurt your feelings? What makes you feel loved? What makes you feel inspired? It's connection that comes from sharing our vulnerabilities and desires with each other, our hopes and dreams. But what else improves connection? Taking the time to enjoy shared activities and interests with each other. Remember what you used to do that you really enjoyed together? Figuring out ways to do it, even in a modified way, even with COVID, limiting what you can do, figuring out how to get close to doing the things you have enjoyed again. Think about early in your relationship when you were first dating and falling for each other. Did you think of yourself as having problems with communication then? Would you have said to somebody, you know, the problem with this new relationship is that we just don't communicate well with each other. That just doesn't happen too often. But you were the same people. You had the same communication styles, probably the same or hopefully less skill than you would have nowadays, right? But why did it work so much better then? Because you were developing and attending to such a deep connection with each other that your communication style differences just didn't feel like such a threat. The deep and profound connection that you felt with each other likely led to a benefit of the doubt kind of a stance that you take with each other, you know, where you assume good intentions and just let the little misses in communication go. This is something that couples can develop or redevelop, rediscover at any stage in the relationship. If you try to deepen your connection, then stay curious about how this impacts your communication. Okay. All right, moving right along. We're up to my thought number 3. owning your own emotions and triggers. If I had to come up with one area where couples need the most help or support or assistance in my practice, it would be learning how to recognize and take ownership of the strong emotions that get activated in each individual and in turn dynamically in the couple. So what does this mean? So the marriage is made up of three parts, right? There's the single entity that is the coming together of two people, the relationship itself, right? But then there's also two individuals that make up the marriage. Most likely the individuals existed and had years of experience before the two of them even met. I certainly would hope so. Some of those past experiences in their formative life were sweet and lovely. Other experiences may have been painful or disturbing or even traumatic. As a certified EMDR or trauma-informed therapist, one of the things that I'm really sensitive to when working with both individuals and couples is how trauma impacts the brain and the body and then impacts our relationships, both our relationship to ourselves, how we're feeling about ourselves, the kind of the tape running through our head, but also how it impacts others. Okay, so here is a diagram of the brain. I won't be spending too much time on this, but it might be helpful to have a basic understanding of what's going on when there's trauma and emotionally disturbing experience. I just want to ask you to try to hang in there with me with this. I know this can get a little bit technical, but I think it'll be worth it to go through this. I think it'll help to connect some of these concepts. So you can see in the top left of the diagram, the prefrontal and neocortex. This is where we organize information, where we do our cognitive and rational thinking. You wouldn't be able to follow any of this presentation if your cortex wasn't sufficiently engaged and online. And then down at the bottom of this little diagram is the brain stem, sometimes referred to the reptilian brain. This is where instinct and survival responses kick in when needed. And then in the middle of the brain, at the core, is our limbic system, or the emotional center of the brain. I always find it really fascinating, if you think about it, how our emotional core literally lies in the center of our brains. This is the area where we experience our feelings and also where we store our emotional memories, including the painful ones. And then that pink colored jelly bean looking thing right in the center is the amygdala. That's a really important part of the brain. This is where the emotional memories get encoded and later activated when they're triggered. So trauma, both the big T kind, or like the life-threatening kind that we all think of, or the developmental kind, where childhood, developmental, and core emotional needs are not met, they remain stored and highly active in the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. And trauma knows no date or timestamp. It's not like other things from the past that feel long ago when they're activated in our brains. If not adequately processed and encoded, the traumatic experience becomes maladaptive for us, and it shows up again and again in our nervous system arousal over the course of our lives. So here's how it goes, okay? When something internal inside of us or external in our relationships and our world occurs that activates that trauma, this lights up the amygdala in such a way that signals to the body that the original threat or experience is happening now, just as it did way back when the original trauma first occurred. Of course, the original event is not happening now. But what's important about this is that our brain tells our body that it is. And then we try to make sense of it. If the way we're responding in our bodies doesn't make sense to the situation, we try to figure that out, and we end up telling ourselves stories or narratives about ourselves or about others that ironically only serve to reinforce that reactivity that happens in us. Okay, as I said, I realize that was pretty technical. It might help if I tell a little story that I'm hoping helps to illustrate this. So let's tell the story of this boy, okay? And let's say that the boy in this picture, he's about to get hit in the face. And the man who's about to hit him in the face is his dad. So this boy has an alcoholic father, and his father is prone to fits of rage, especially when he's been drinking. He can be unpredictable. He humiliates the boy and degrades him. And sometimes he really lashes out, hits the boy, punches the boy, throws the boy across the room, okay? And this went on as far as the little boy could remember, even before he understands that his father's drinking. So let's take a situation with this little boy and his dad. The dad's been drinking, and the dad starts to gripe and complain about, where the hell are my keys? Now, this little boy developmentally needs emotional and physical safety, but he also needs connection with his dad. So trying to help preserve the connection with his dad, he offers up, Daddy, you left your keys on the nightstand. And the dad, in response, lashes out and says, what the hell do you know? And smacks the boy across the face. So this only has to happen so many times, as you would imagine, before this little boy starts to connect the dots. Even if he doesn't understand why this is happening, he starts to connect the dots and realize, all right, when there are these indicators that dad is getting emotionally activated and intense, it doesn't work when I put myself forward. The best thing that I can do is to pull back, shut down, no expression, quiet, disappear in the corner of the room, leave the room, or if I have to be in the room with him, figure out a way to become invisible so that he notices anything except for me, right? If you think about it, that is an incredibly creative and clever answer that his brain and his body came up with in order to stay emotionally and physically more safe. And interestingly, in order to preserve his connection with his dad. It's threatened when his dad lashes out at him, okay? So that's his background. Now, fast forward, this little boy has grown up. He's now a man. And he's married. And he's coming into my office with his wife to do some marital counseling. And I'm asking the couple, what are you here to work on? What's going on in the relationship? And the wife speaks first, and she explains, I used to think that he just didn't care about me. And now I'm convinced he really doesn't love me anymore. I ask, why is that? And she explains, it's so common that I'm trying to talk to him about things on my mind, about things in my life. And he's going like this. He's on his phone. He's not even looking at me. And worse yet, I can come home and I can say to him, I had a terrible day at work. It was so upsetting. So-and-so was so mean to me. And it's like he's looking the other way, or he's like looking right through me. I'm like, hello, are you even listening to me? And then I try to talk to him and I open up my heart and I say, you're not even acting like you care. You don't even seem to love me. And he shrugs, or he says, I don't know. And then I turn to the man and I say to him, what do you make of all of this? And he says, she's probably right. I mean, I thought I loved her. I really did. But she's right. I'm terrible at this stuff. She keeps telling me and opening her heart to me. And all I do is just sit there and do nothing. I mean, I'm pathetic. Couples find a place of mutual reactivity where both are getting activated or triggered, and both may be responding less to here and now threats and more to the original triggering event. So it's like when I withdraw, you experience that as you're going to be abandoned. I mean, actually abandoned. And then when you react to that to protect yourself with intensity and criticism due to the panic and dread that kicks in for you, I experience that as if I'm going to be hurt, like actually hurt. If we simply react to what gets triggered, those reaction patterns we do together reinforce what our brain is telling us, that our experience of the activation means that we are not safe. So we go about trying to protect ourselves, right? Together, we co-create a reality that ironically decreases the emotional safety in the relationship and then ends up confirming or falsely proving our anticipated experience. So, what are the alternatives? Start with awareness. Just try to be a little bit more aware that we're having a strong visceral or emotional reaction in the moment. Practice noticing at the start rather than late in the experience. Try to accept this as our experience and avoid blaming the other and reacting to the other. And then get compassionate. Compassion and grace toward ourselves, that the activation we are experiencing doesn't mean that we're defective or weak, like the man I told you about in the story. Compassion and grace with our spouse, that our experience of them does not necessarily mean that they're a threat to our well-being. As Jimmy Durante used to sing, try a little tenderness. Of course, it's important to mention that there obviously can be situations in current relationships that really do pose an emotional or even physical safety risk. I don't want to overlook that. Safety should always be prioritized. If in doubt, get help. But for the purposes of what we're talking about here, I'm not talking about those situations. I'm talking about the situations where our brains and our bodies experience that you're a threat to me, but really, you're not really posing the threat that I'm feeling. Okay. Other alternatives to this reactivity. Get curious. I like to call it compassionate curiosity. Learn to listen to each other with an open heart. Lean in and try to really hear in a different way, in a non-defensive way, the other's fears and needs and experiences. Be curious about what's really happening inside of them. Be willing to put your own reactivity aside for long enough that you can actually hear and be present. And then take the risk to share vulnerability. If you can't be vulnerable with each other, it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to be truly intimate with each other. It's just a package deal. And then finally, when needed, get professional help. Sometimes these dynamics get so stuck and so scary and so powerful that our best faith efforts just don't succeed in trying to get things back into alignment. And when that happens, an experienced marital therapist can help you to do the work together. Or sometimes an individual therapist, when needed, to help you work through and reprocess trauma, especially if there's complex or severe trauma. Okay, moving right along. My fourth thought, complementary, not threatening. So when a couple meets and falls for each other, there's attraction, right? Physical attraction, of course, but what else? We tend to be attracted to ways that we're similar, right? We know that. Similar worldviews, similar passions, interests, values. But we also tend to be highly attracted to the ways that we are different and complement each other. In fact, the very complaints that couples have about each other later in the relationship, more often than not, started as an attraction or something that they were drawn to in each other. Think about it. You'll find that in your own relationship. For example, let's take these two people on the screen. She's felt deep inside like her life has been rather chaotic and unpredictable. Lots of loss, abandonment, people come and go, nothing's predictable. She's so attracted to his steadiness, his organization, his reserved, methodical style, and his strong, rational mind. Now, he has felt discomfort his whole life in social spheres. And deep inside, he's longed to have more fun and excitement in his world. As a child, he often felt unseen and unnoticed. He's learned to minimize risk by taking less risk. So he's really attracted to her free spirit, her playful ways, her outgoing, engaging style, her spontaneity. And at the same time, they both share similar religious, personal, political views. I mean, what a match. So what do you think that this couple is going to come to criticize and complain about each other, both in their own heads and to the other, and try to change in each other over time? You're probably guessing correctly. The very complementary qualities or the differences that actually first drew them to each other, the things that complemented or made them feel complete or made them feel like, I don't have it, you do. So why is this? Many of our differences are resources to us individually and to our marriage and our families if we can avoid the trap of reacting to those differences as a threat to our personal, emotional safety and security. The differences are going to feel like a threat if we're positioning ourselves in opposition to our spouse in order to protect our vulnerabilities. But sadly, or even tragically, this sends a message to the other that we don't value or accept them at a core level, making it harder to trust and harder to draw closer to one another. We can strengthen our resolve to instead see that our differences have a complementary quality if we can draw close together as a team, an intimate unit, and own our own vulnerabilities and insecurities, and what can sometimes grow to feel threatening about the differences. So how do you know if you're falling into the traps of responding to the other's differences as threats and not as compliments? So watch out for the following two big traps. Are you criticizing? Criticizing often involves reducing the actions of your spouse to the worst possible interpretation, belittling or humiliating the other with your accusations. Instead, try clarifying and opening up. Get curious, like I was talking about. Get vulnerable. Share your struggle, okay? The other big trap, and boy, does this happen a lot, especially with the educated, intellectual folks. Are you being super smart? Are you trying to pull things closer by telling the other one what they're missing and how they struggle? Telling them what you see that they just don't get? I know very few people who like that. Instead, try showing compassionate curiosity. Try sharing your experience and needs and struggles instead of emphasizing theirs. So again, another example to try to illustrate and put into 3 dimensions what I'm talking about. So here's an example of how we can fall into those 2 big traps. So a young mom who has more of an emotional language and uses verbal processing as a resource is more inclined to talk to their young daughter, Jennifer, about Jennifer's tantrums, about what Jennifer was feeling and experiencing before she melted down. Dad, on the other hand, who's a strong limit setter, has a kind of a less is more approach to the discipline. He prefers to simply tell Jennifer the consequences of her actions and just not engage in a dialogue. So following an event with Jennifer, or even worse, perhaps during the event, mom criticizes dad for missing an opportunity to help Jennifer to connect more to her emotional experience and to her actions so she can grow and she can learn. But then she complains that he's disengaged and leaves it all to her and just wants to punish the daughter because it's the easier way to go. She accuses him of not caring, just like he doesn't care about her in the marriage. And then she calls him pathetic. But dad's in on this too. He criticizes mom for being weak and for missing the point. He tells his wife that she always wants to coddle Jennifer, and as a result, Jennifer is playing her mom. He complains that his wife is reinforcing the negative behavior by giving Jennifer all this attention after she's behaved badly. He adds that this is the same thing as when his wife always wants to talk to him about problems in the marriage. She just never lets anything go, and he calls her pathetic. So that's their story, right? Who's right? Well, they're both right, and they're both wrong. Or more to the point, both are kind of onto something, right? They see something, but neither of them has all the answers. And even more importantly, both are missing an important opportunity to have their strengths complemented in their marriage, in their family, by the other spouse and parent. And unfortunately, the worst part is that both are saying mean and hurtful things and doing a lot of damage in the process. Both feel hurt and unseen with the way that they're being characterized and caricatured by the other. Having a miss or getting off track can be an opportunity to come together and draw from what both have to offer. There's options here. Sometimes they can just try it mom's way and see how that goes. Experiment, right? They could try it dad's way, see how that goes. Or even better, what if they talk and explore and come up with their way, a way that respects and draws from the best of what both have to offer? If they do, they'll minimize overplaying their hand, overdoing what they both know to do, think overdeveloped, and instead they can gift their daughter with an opportunity for both verbal processing and learning, along with clear limits and consequences, which from where I sit as a family therapist is going to be a winning combination for her. Okay, my fifth and final thought, romance. As I said, I think I'm saving the best for last. So if I'm sharing my thoughts about marriage and relationships, I got to say that one of the best ways to deepen connection and intimacy and build trust and closeness in the relationship is to put an emphasis on romance. It seems so obvious, but when life happens, work, kids, COVID, we can lose sight of this. What makes a marriage different from other partnerships or long-term family relationships or friendships? It is this opportunity to share romantically with each other, right? In addition to a couple having a long-standing friendship, household, co-executive partnership, activity partnership, and all that kind of stuff, a marriage provides an opportunity for romantic and sexual intimacy based in feeling noticed, cherished, loved, and then enjoying and taking pleasure in each other on a whole other level. Romance really is the good stuff. So when I was putting this training together and I thought of romance, just because I was kind of curious, I right-clicked on the word romance on my computer. You don't even have to look it up in the dictionary, right? You can just click on it and it pops it up right there on the screen. And I thought it was kind of interesting what came up. So romance, right? The first definition, a feeling of excitement and mystery associated with love. And number two, love, especially when sentimental or idealized. Love with an element of excitement and mystery, sentimental and idealized love. I mean, I don't think I'm overstating it. That's the good stuff, right? So what can you do when you feel concerned now or perhaps in the future that the romance is gone from the marriage? Well, I'd say start by respecting the idea that the romance probably isn't gone, but it may be diminished or hibernating. I mean, I just think it's, as a starting point, I think it's better to look at it this way. It's easier to wake somebody up from a nap than to try to revive the dead. So don't go to the extreme. But then discuss the topic openly with each other. I mean, is this important to both of you? If so, how so? I mean, it's possible that maybe you both define what would feel romantic a little bit differently. And that's okay. Remember, difference can be complementary. It can be a strength. It doesn't have to be a threat. Speaking of which, what are your love languages? Do you long for words of affirmation? Is that going to feel romantic to you? Do you look for physical affection, sexual and non-sexual touch? Maybe acts of service. Maybe it feels romantic when your spouse does things around the house, or quality time together, or gift giving and receiving. It's good to know how you like to give and receive love, so you can share that with each other and understand what's similar, understand what's different, and then go about trying to meet each other's love needs. I assure you, if the romance has gone into hiding in your relationship, no one person in the marriage can be solely to blame. Even if it's true that one has clearly checked out more than the other, and that happens, romance doesn't disappear in a day. It just fades away slowly and gradually over time. So the absence of romance was co-created. And the good news about that as a way of looking at it is it suggests that what it takes to begin to get it back are just two people who are willing to share their romantic needs and interests with each other, and then to say, let's try to do something about that. So try talking about it. What does he want? What does she want? What would feel loving and romantic? Discuss it openly, again, without the blame or criticism. And get creative, get playful, have fun doing some of the things that your spouse has told you or hinted at would feel good. For example, he says to himself, she just commented on how much she loves that sweater in that catalog and how much she misses shopping for clothes during the pandemic. How fun would it be to just order this and surprise her? How romantic might that be? And when you notice some romantic effort from your spouse, even if it's a little bit clumsy or limited or not exactly what you're hoping for, make a very conscious point, an intentional effort at noticing and appreciating it. I really can't emphasize that enough. Say thank you. Share the effort means so much to me. I see it. For example, she says to him, "Is that hand on my shoulder you trying to touch me more like I asked?" Even though she really was hoping for a massage. And he says, well, yeah, that is what I'm doing. And she replies, "Well, that means so much to me that you're putting out the effort. Thank you." So he glows and she glows and they both glow. I mean, this is super important, remembering to see it and acknowledge it. Behavior 101 teaches us, if somebody is willing to go out of their comfort zone to do something that we have said is super important to us, if we criticize it or even if we ignore the effort, they might do it 2 or 3 times. It's going to extinguish. She says, "Why bother? He doesn't seem to notice anyway. It's hard enough work, so why do things that doesn't seem to make a difference to him?" And then before we get off of this subject of romance, we should also just briefly touch on sex, so to speak. In your marriage or your romantic relationship, if one of you has a bigger sexual appetite or interest in sex than the other, then welcome to how it is for almost every marriage out there. But finding ways to reconnect and re-engage sexually is also very important to a healthy relationship. And if it feels emotionally unsafe or stuck to try to bridge that, I would say that that's a good time to think about maybe getting some professional help in navigating the terrain and taking some incremental steps toward trying to get it unstuck in a way that feels safe, in a way that feels supportive. Not surprisingly, many couples who have struggled with connecting day to day will see sex also disconnect in the relationship. And many accurately observe that one or both are just not interested in sex when things feel disconnected. That's understandable, and that should be respected. But remembering that physical and sexual touch is a core love language for many, it's also important to remember that the relationship between the absence of connection to sex and also the absence of sex to connection in the relationship. In other words, similar to the way that I was saying before, that communication impacts connection and connection impacts communication, well, connection impacts sex, but also sex can impact connection. Have I confused you? Often in a relationship, if the relationship is so disconnected, it's to the point where it's sex starved. If the couple is waiting for connection in order to resume intimate physical touch, they might miss how often this flows both ways. So assuming it feels safe enough to do so, and assuming nobody's being coerced or bullied, intentionally making some time for sexual touch and play can and often does increase connection in other non-sexual intimate areas for many couples. So, romance. I saved it for last, not just because it's the best, because it's super important. I know of very few couples who can honestly feel that they have a wonderful, or say they have a wonderful marriage or relationship, who do not also feel like the romance is alive and well. And to conclude, let me just add, many people like to say that expression or saying relationships take work. I get where that's coming from, but I'm actually not a real fan of that expression, because for me, it just makes it sound like such a chore, such a drag. But anything worthwhile, and I would hope that our marriage and romantic relationships are worthwhile, certainly take attention. So put attention into your relationship, including the romance, and see what that does for your connection and your communication and your heart, your marriage, and ultimately your family. And with that, I have come to the end of my presentation. I'm going to put my contact information up in just a second, give you a moment to look at that. And then I'll take a look and see if anybody sent over any questions or comments in the chat. And we can spend a little time on that depending on how much time we've got. So let me, yeah.
It's Lauren. Curious, would you mind making these slides available to folks if maybe if you sent them to me, I could then email them to our folks who want them. I've had a request for them, if that is amenable to you.
Absolutely. The only caveat to that is because of what I was talking about around a virtual or Zoom presentation, I did the slides with probably even a little bit less detail than I might. But absolutely, I'm happy to send those on to you. I'll probably just send them as a PDF, and then definitely share those as you like.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then certainly if folks have questions, if you want to send them privately to Adam, do so now if you haven't already, or if you want to put them in the public chat so we can all see the question. If you're comfortable, then feel free to do that as well. We have about 10 minutes left.
Lauren, are the questions going to come to you? Me?
I'd say send them directly to either Adam, or or if you want to send them to everyone, if you're comfortable with us seeing your question, then you can send them to everyone in the chat.
Okay. And here's a question. Ask and you shall receive. I got a question. I'm going to read them all just in case people don't see the chat for whatever reason. I got a question. Do you offer premarital counseling? I do offer premarital counseling. I love doing premarital counseling. I have like a lot of marital or couples therapists, I've developed a kind of a tool or a structure to navigate some of the anticipated big areas where you can pretty much anticipate that if you marry someone and you stay married over time, that these areas are going to come up. And then I invite people to take some time to explore this together, to think outside of the sessions and then come in together and to kind of structure a conversation with that. So, it's in-laws and money and sexual matters and children and religion and all the big stuff that's going to come up. A lot of people feel like and legitimately do say, we talk about these things regularly. Sometimes with a little bit of structure and a little bit of a guidance, there are ways to consider angles to that you don't necessarily think about or touch on that can be helpful later when things come up, especially as things change and evolve over time. So yes, is the answer. You're welcome, Lauren. Thank you for that. Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about how to better communicate during an argument? Boy, that's a big area. I don't mean it as a cop-out, but I would say that my response to that is going to be so individual, depending on the couple, depending on what it is about the communication that's not working. But let me give a few ideas that come to mind, a few general kinds of things. It helps to try to allow the space to hear each other and to not wait to talk until you hear something that gets you activated, like I was talking about, and then hit a point with things that can feel critical or things that are going to be defensive. So I suggest structuring that, if it's helpful, where one person has a chance to kind of say what it is that they need to say, and the other one listens and tries to listen actively and tries to listen non-defensively, and then following that kind of reflects, this is what I'm hearing you say, before trying to fix anything, before trying to apologize or do anything differently. Just you say it and let me just reflect back what it is that you're saying, and then we'll switch and we'll take a time for the other one to do that. I think that's something that couples can do and try to structure for themselves. But it's golden rule stuff, trying to talk the way that you like to be talked to. I know of very few couples who don't say, it gets so hard when the intensity kicks in, when the volume comes up, either with literal volume or the intensity of what's being talked about. Most of us feel like, especially when we're talking about difficult or vulnerable things, can you just be gentle with me? So I think a couple can make an agreement. Let's try to do that. And if that's not working because someone's, there's emotion, that's okay if there's emotion, if things get intense, being prepared to say, I don't like how this feels. I don't feel up to this anymore. I don't like the way I'm talking. I don't like the way you're talking. Let's just pause. Let's give ourselves a moment to kind of regroup and see if we can come back again and talk to each other in a way that you want to talk to somebody that you love and care about and want to be kind to. There's a lot more that I could say about that, but maybe that's a start. Let's see. What ideas do you have to build romance into the day-to-day? These are great questions. It's like I was saying before, look for cues that you'll hear things directly and indirectly that are hints as to what the other one finds to be romantic, and then try to find opportunities to do those things. And if you don't know, I don't think you lose any points for asking. What are things that I could do that would feel romantic to you now? Maybe it's going to be different now than it was a few months ago or a year ago. And take note of those things and then try to do those things and check in. you said you wanted me to touch you some more. I've been holding your hand when we watch TV, and I've been giving you the little massages. Have you noticed that? So I think checking in on that stuff is a great way to build romance. I mean, being romantic is really thinking creatively and playfully what would make you feel good. You know, if you start to think about that, couples come up with all sorts of stuff. I worked with a couple who talked about, something that he used to do when we were dating that I loved. And then once things got more serious, he stopped. And I wish he would do again, is he used to write me these little notes, like his little Post-it notes, and he just stick them places. And sometimes they were funny, and sometimes they let me know he was thinking about me, and I loved it. And it was huge that she shared that. It was risky to share it because he might reject it or ignore it. And he was like, I could do that. So it's being willing to share, and it's being willing to hear that and say, let me try. Okay. Next one. Okay. Do you think it would be too overwhelming or rather actually helpful to pursue premarital counseling while also undergoing trauma counseling? You're going to hate this. It depends. Here's what I think it depends on. If the individual undergoing the trauma work talks to the therapist and says, how do you do this trauma work? What are you anticipating? You know me, you know my situation, you know how you work. I know it's always individual, but give me a ballpark of what you think this process would look like. If the trauma therapist says, I think a few months, and if the wedding is in a year, then probably do the trauma work and then do the premarital counseling. I think if you're doing good evidence-based trauma work, I think you're going to be in a much better position to be able to go deeper and to be less reactive in doing the premarital counseling if you approach it that way. Having said that, if the wedding is a few 3 months off and the therapist says, we'll probably be doing this for the next year, then maybe you do them side by side. I think anything that helps, that an individual does to try to say, whether it's your own therapy, whether it's journaling, whether it's mindfulness or meditation, whether it's just engaging in things that fill you up and bring you joy, activities or going for a walk or whatever. Anything that we do to take care of ourselves and respect what it is that we need, I think increases the chances that you're going to show up for something like premarital counseling or any conversation you're having with your partner that requires you to just try to bring your better self to it. You're welcome to the one who said thanks. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Rick shared with me that my office address was his grandparents' house when he was growing up. That is an incredible story. I would love to hear someday. I mean, reach out to me, shoot me a note or something. I want to hear the stories of like what you remember in the house. So I'm in the basement, which has been converted into offices. But when I think about my grandparents' home, they have long ago passed, but they lived in the Boston area. And I think about that home. And even though I grew up in California, so visiting there happened at best once a year, maybe every other year. I can see that in my mind, like I could just go there right now. I would love to hear the stories of what happened and, that you can share about different rooms in this building. That's amazing. Okay. I'm not sure what's meant by this one. No timeline, big picture and health, laying the foundation.
Adam, I think that may have been a response to the person who asked about the trauma. Premarital. No timeline on the wedding. I think.
Thank you.
No timeline.
Thank you. Yeah, all things being equal, trauma work, not always, but very often tends to be a little of a less time than other kinds of traditional talk therapy. So if you're doing that if you have the opportunity, yeah, I think doing that first would be a great idea. Oh, the basement was where grandfather and you hung out. So what happened in my office? You know, it's like, that's amazing. It's incredible. I love that. And then there's the clarification on the no timeline of the wedding. Well, incredibly, it's 7:31 and we've gotten through these questions. So that's great. It's always a shame when somebody wrote something and you're like, oh, there isn't time to get to. So I'm glad we did. If you think of something following this training and you go, I just want to ask the guy a question, shoot me an email. You've got my contact information. You won't be bothering me if you want to just, I meant to ask this. I'm open to that. So, reach out and ask me a question. I'll be happy to respond if you're talking about something that's very personal and very in-depth and very vulnerable or private, probably best to not do that by email. But this kind of stuff that's just about, nuts and bolts kind of stuff or things you're trying to put together, sure, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to respond. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks to everyone at the church. I really enjoyed this. What a great opportunity to be one of your 3 people to respond to this. I hope this was helpful and useful for all of you who participated.